What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of EOS. It's 1090 Jake. I'm rocking with y'all rocking with me. For this video, got another interview for y'all, special guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name's Joe Lawler. I'm from Boston, a neighborhood of Boston called Charlestown, and I'm blessed and grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for having me, my friend.
Definitely. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Now, I am very familiar with Charlestown,
Yep.
but I want to hear your story starting from the very beginning. What was it like growing up there?
Growing up in Charlestown was different. You know, it was something that I would never change. You know, I certainly wouldn't change it. It has Charlestown has a reputation, you know, but I think from what I've learned as I've gotten older is that, you know, a lot of people hang on to that reputation, you know, for all the wrong reasons. And you know, myself included, you know, and there's a lot of, for as much pride as there is in a neighborhood like Charlestown, South Boston, you know, different neighborhoods there, what I've learned along the way is that pride ultimately was, you know, underlying stuff like, you know, fears, insecurities, and, you know, all you know, camouflaged and covered up or whatever to protect, like, you know, to protect people, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, you know, so it was like survival mode. So,
Right.
well, you know, that's what I've gotten out of it.
I feel like nationwide, you know, one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite, is The Town.
Yep.
And, you know, it's the bank robberies, the armored truck robberies. Charlestown's known as a tough place. And it's also is really a white hood,
Yeah.
which in other places they've never heard of. You know, Charlestown has white projects.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So
It certainly does.
tell me how it is coming from a place like that. Like at what point did you know or start to realize you lived in a place that was different from other areas of Boston and Massachusetts?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. To be honest with you, I didn't know, you know, I grew up there, you know, what I knew, I knew that, it was a tight knit community. I knew that there was, you know, love there. I knew that I was, you know, protected or whatever. I was secure. But I also, you know, I didn't really compare, or you know, there was no, you know, poverty, or you know, wasn't like rich or poor, or whatever. Everyone was kind of equal or whatever. It was either, I guess, like the first time I really ever thought about it was maybe like as I entered my teenage years, and you know, my parents, like they started out in like in the bricks and then to a housing development, you know, which is like projects without the bricks. And then eventually, you know, they got a house, and I was young. And you know, I remember growing up and having a house, and a lot of my friends, you know, had the single, you know, had maybe a mom, no dad, and came from those broken homes, and they lived in the projects. And when I remember feeling that feeling of almost like I felt ashamed that I had something that they didn't have, you know. And
Mm.
ultimately, when I look back, I know what that was. You know, I didn't want them to feel less than, and in turn, I ended up, you know, I caused myself a lot of harm along the way because, you know, I settled for less, and like, you know, I just kind of wanted to fit in, and like where I wanted to fit in and where I ended up ultimately, you know, being accepted was by those, you know, people that were in situations that they, if they had known any better, or maybe they learned along the way, you know, couldn't wait to get out of, you know.
So even though you felt more fortunate, you felt more comfortable with the unfortunate.
Oh, 100%. I'm hard headed, like a tough learner, you know, and I'll get it, but like I'm gonna have to bang my head along the way. You know, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to. Pain's a great motivator, and I certainly suffered my share of that. You know, and like you said, yeah, I felt comfortable. I got in where I could fit in, and like ultimately where I fit in was, I almost felt like I was doing better. So right off the rip, I was comparing. You know, I wasn't identifying anything within myself. You know, I was running, I was escaping just like every other kid, you know, and that goes for anywhere. But in a neighborhood like that, like I said, the problem with that is the misinformation that, you know, I carried, and every other kid did, because we certainly weren't down the corner talking about, you weren't talking about what was going on in your house, right? Because what goes on here stays here, right?
Mhm.
That was never elaborated on. And you certainly weren't saying if you were having a bad day or whatever, you know, you kind of just wore that, you arm it up and you kept it moving. And thank God for mental health, like like how it's come along the way, and that there's help for it, and there's things out there now, Um, but as far as doing it, that's a whole nother ball game. So, but yeah, and you talked about Charlestown being like an Irish ghetto, right? So I'm sure you read the book The Westies, Hell's Kitchen, New York.
I haven't.
No, or you
Nah.
gotta read that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, New York has the boroughs, the Bronx, Brooklyn, all that shit, and Boston has the neighborhoods, as you know.
Right.
So
Well, explain it for the people that don't know the neighborhood breakdown of Boston.
so obviously it's 2025. Things have been gentrified, and also there are people that maybe live in a high rise that nonstop a high rise today that are in plants and live in the city because they work there.
Yeah.
But when growing up, it was all neighborhoods. You went to Boston, like downtown, maybe people work there and stuff. Or as kids, we take the bus in and stuff, and that would be we make a day of it. But ultimately, it was all neighborhoods. So you had my neighborhood was Irish Catholic neighborhood, South Boston, the same thing, and it was just basically a smaller version of South Boston. So you have South Boston, right? Is you hear Boston's in the word, right? Right then and there. And Charlestown, it says Charlestown, Mass, but it's a neighborhood of Boston, right? So
Right.
Boston's made up. Basically, my neighborhood, my town is was too small to be its own city because you go across the bridge and you have Cambridge, and it's right there. It's connected, but it's big enough where it's its own city. So Cambridge and Charlestown are right next to each other, but one's known for like MIT and for smarts or Goodwill Hunting, you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
janitor that the mathematician, and Charlestown is predominantly, it was when known for a lot of a lot of the wrong things, like I said, but that didn't stop me from following suit, and once hitting that corner as a teenager and saying like, what do I got to do, like where do I sign up? And like I say, like I checked all the boxes, of this resume that like I created in my head. And
When you first stepped into the street, what was some of the things that were going on? Was there any neighborhood rivalries between Charlestown and Southie? Was it kids in Charlestown you were beefing with? Was it drugs? Like, what was your introduction to the streets?
so my introduction to the streets was, like I said, you know, we went from sports to courts, right? We wanted to be Cam Neely, we wanted to be Ray Bork, you know, we wanted to be Larry Bird or whatever. And then overnight almost it was like once I hit that corner, I say all the time, my mother could have been Mother Teresa, my father could have been the Pope, and once I hit the corner, I was gonna be whatever I thought you'd accept me as. And I say that for myself. Like I love that saying because I think it sums up in a lot of ways, like, and it's something that I need to hear. But that right there, when I was able to say that and like and speak my truth, it was something that went off inside me where there's something to be said about it. Like it fulfilled me. Like it almost filled my tank where, that hole in your soul, that void, or something that you maybe lacking, or and when I started talking like that, but I had to learn, like I said, I had to go through a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of self-inflicted. And it was because, like I said, that what goes on in this house stays in this house, and like you just put on that brave face, and like at the end of the day, I'm a human being, right? I can't disassociate, right? That's the difference between like a sociopath or like a narcissist or someone that can like do that, right? I've ran with people that suffer from that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to sit here and diagnose them, but I don't have that luxury. I can't flip a switch, and I feel everything. So in turn, like hitting that corner, what I know now is that I was running like right from the rip. I was trying to escape something, right, myself, really, at the end of the day. And I think that it held true for a lot of the kids in my neighborhood. Most of them, because we were cut from the same cloth. We came from the same type of backgrounds and families, and that's not just Charleston. That goes like throughout the city.
Yeah.
So those teenage years, which are obviously very impressionable, I don't think most people are born leaders, and I'm fine with just at the end of the day, it's like, all right, so I'm fine with just like I just want to be, I want to be part of, right? I want to be one of the boys, right? And the misinformation that we were given, not by malice or spite, was just generation after generation that was like that trickled down and that was passed down. And I came from a house where like I had my parents, like I say, like they were citizens. They weren't, they didn't come from criminal activity and stuff like that, but they would knock around people. And what that means is like, when the truck came through, or when the trailers came through, down Sullivan Square or something, and next thing you know, there's new Nikes or a new jumpsuit, or it didn't matter what it was, right? Like you hit the corner and every kid down there, right? It didn't matter if their mother or father was into illegal activity or anything. Like even the knock around people, those like the straight laced people and the people that like went to work every day and taught their children, morals, values, and principles. That kid was rocking the same things, the same, you know what I mean? The same Nikes. And so, you think about the things that kind of shape you or whatnot. So, and then like when we're left to figure it out on our own, um, this head for sure is certainly unreliable, So, but yeah, so that's yeah, Charleston was a different place. I wouldn't change it, but it certainly led to maybe my story would have manifested in a different way or whatever. Maybe I would have suffered in a different way, and I believe that may be true. But I seriously doubt that I would have engaged in the criminal activity that I did. Jumped right in, I was all in, and that wasn't how I was raised. And maybe I don't go to prison and spend my 20s in prison and in the time that I'll never get back. But what I learned today is like, when I wasn't willing to face that or look at that and kind of accept like what had happened to me or whatever, or like how my story unfolded, like I was stuck in it because I held on to a resentment that like if I grew up in Wellesley or like one of these towns that I wouldn't have went through what I went through. And I think we both know that that's not true.
Right.
I kind of, so for what it's worth, I wouldn't change it. Maybe back then I would have had a different story or whatnot, but we come out the other side, and you're a testament to it yourself.
What was the first, or when was the first time you were arrested?
The first time I was arrested, they talk about like progression and how things like they progress so quickly. Where coming from that house, with that unconditional love, right? But to me, like we're like I said about the comparison, right? Like they talk about compare, identify, don't compare. So when I went down the corner, and I feel like maybe I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure every kid was doing the same thing, right? It gave me comfort. It made me feel okay. Basically, I would say to look and see like, all right, this kid has it worse, right? So you talked about where I felt comfortable, right? I felt comfortable when I thought that you didn't have what I have, right? But like I couldn't be even proud of what I was given and like what my parents had provided for me, because I was so worried about like I didn't want to make you feel bad, or I didn't want to like put the mirror in your face, and in turn what that does, it created like just a scenario where it was just a big facade and there was a lot of lies and a lot of misinformation, and like the same people that were taught like that, the morals, values, and pride that like we're in the sandbox, and our mothers told us like, you don't tattle on people and stuff like that. Like I say, I didn't have to go down the street corner to fucking know not to tell on someone. You know what I'm saying?
That was like a neighborhood, like that was a code that was instilled in the families.
Yeah, I learned. Yeah, we learned that at at home, and so maybe with that being said, I think that speaks for itself too. Like where else? That's probably a little abnormal, but it kind of I think that it got us prepared already for situations in life that like a lot of people I don't think would be able to survive. And I wouldn't wish on anyone, to be honest with you. And so that tight knit community, that pride, there's a fine line between like the pride and like the ego and stuff. Where there's a lot of there's a saying that says like egomaniac with inferiority complex, and that couldn't hold more true. Where it was like when I needed to, I had no substance, right? So when I went down that corner, right, and I was a good kid, right, and so to speak. And he comes from a good family, right? Well, that's all irrelevant. I had good intentions. That was all irrelevant. I didn't know that. I hung on to that for a long time. That was my identity,
Right.
but I never formed my own identity. My own identity. My identity was formed by what, like, my environment and how it was perceived, right? And the perception of that looked like, if I, what do I have to do to be one of the boys? What do I have to do to get this recognition? And for someone like me, right, that scared kid that went down the corner, and I liked, your story when you talk about it, when you hit the prison system and stuff, and being in the environments that you were in. Um, it's like that fear, and that's what I like to like speak of now, and like because it's so profound to me. It's like I was so uncomfortable with my own skin, right, that I was willing to like be a chameleon. I was willing to do whatever it took to like let you know I'm not scared, right? I'm not scared. But what that looked like was a lot of like, self like inflicting pain and like things that, I guess we're lucky to even be here to be, and having this conversation, because a lot of family, friends, acquaintances, they weren't that fortunate. So
Right.
I like to believe that, at the end of the day, like, and that's like what it keeps me humble and humility, where, and I see it in you. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, if someone can learn from my experience, I kind of believe that people have to go through their own stuff. I have a 21-year-old, my son, like I've taught, he's on his own journey right now. And that's tough. It's tough because growing up, it was like our caretakers, like our parents, like we had, you know, I always say the good people where we're from are the salt of the earth. You know, no one can tell me different, right? But it's also like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, where it comes down to like the person and like their identity. And everyone was like so codependent, right? You had the mothers that like took care, and like they would, I joke around like 46 years old. My mother would still wipe my ass if I let her, you know what I mean? And like that's, that's it. We make light of things where it was always whatever made you feel comfortable, and like, and everyone assumed that role. Everyone took that role on, and they did it to like the best of their ability. That don't always look pretty, and that's not always the right way. So
Going down to that corner, obviously, is a phrase, right? What was it that you were actually participating in? And at what point, what was it that led to your first arrest?
so the first, when I hit the corner, like I said, it started with, maybe, I think it started with like finding a dirty pack, of Bud Light. The older kids had hidden in an alleyway, and going up the back of the park. We had a couple spots in the neighborhood, whatnot, where the cops wouldn't bother you, and it was almost like, you had arrived. And I remember, so it started with a beer, let's say, but the difference between nowadays and back then was like, you know, back then it was like you drank a beer, you smoked a joint, you did a line, you popped a pill, maybe you took some acid, mushrooms, whatever, and like no one was dying. Um, and from there, I think maybe that right there, that was kind of blocked. It blocked me from, it blocked you from, you didn't know. I was just, it was all about acceptance. And from there, it was like, what do I do next? And then it was like, okay, so now I drank with the older kids, I drank a beer, whatnot. And then now it's drug dealing, right? I'm looking around and I'm seeing people like, who's getting the respect, who's getting the money, and who has this, it's all materialistic stuff. And they seemed like they were it, and they had it all figured out. So what I did, as opposed to, I wasn't down that corner thinking about what my mother taught me, my father had taught me, those morals, values, and principles, like I said, that were instilled. I was following the people that were misinformed before me, and it had nothing to do with, it wasn't a moral issue. It wasn't about whether they were, great guys, right? But like, you know, that didn't stop them from dying. That didn't stop them from, spending their life in prison and stuff. And those are the people I followed. So it went from, maybe drinking a beer and just like partying and hanging out with friends. And right away, it was like right off the rip, the drug dealing stuff, maybe starting with dime bags. Um, and from there, it just progressed. Like, what do you do in a neighborhood like that, right? Like, so, well, the drug dealing. So, what's the next step, right? So now you got to hit a bank. Now you got to rob, right? You got to be a stick up kid, right?
That's truly the reputation of Charlestown, is the robberies, the bank robberies, the truck robberies. Like, that's really the reputation. So even when you were growing up, was that reputation already solidified and you kind of had an idea like this is where I'm leading to?
Yes, as for as long as far back as I can remember, like in Goodfellas when Henry held mom, he's like, ever since I was a little kid, all I ever want to do was be a gangster.
Yeah.
And I laugh, like I joke about that stuff, right? Because like, what's that word even mean, right? People, the spin that is put on it. I went down the corner, like I said, and like that was already I was already predisposed to that, right? This is what I was gonna do, whether I liked it or not, right? So if I was gonna do it, I was gonna go all in. I was gonna be like I talked about that fear, right? Little did I know, like I was so like consumed with fear and like uncomfortable with myself that like I was gonna go above and beyond. And you had talked about it in your story. I was gonna go above and beyond to like make myself official, to like validate like who I was,
Right.
you know, and as opposed to just being that being Joe from a good family and like with good parents and like and just following that road. That was never. I didn't allow it to be an option. I that acceptance meant everything to me. So it went from I heard all the stories. When I from even when it was still from sports to courts, when I was still in that phase, it was glamorized. That word there was there's no other way I could put it. And in that era, I'd say like my era was probably the last of a dying breed, the last of the Mohicans, where like cowboy shit, and the code that we had bought into was, could have been a death sentence, but it certainly wasn't what it was portrayed to be. And like I say, I got what I signed up for, right? That's not, what makes me, it was what made me tick at the time or whatever, because I had no, we talked about the identity aspect of it. So as a kid, like, I ran so hard right off the rip that like, from picking up that bear at 15 years old, let's say, right? And then starting, drug dealing and doing banks and like then learning right away that like the banks, there's no money there's only so much money that they keep in the drawers, right? So real money's in trucks, right? And that's the truth. And then I blinked and I was 21 years old and I was off to prison. And he talked about it was no different than when I showed up in that corner and had that beer with the older kids. And now I was that guy, right? Based on what you told me I was. It was no difference than that. And then being 21 years old and blinking and it was I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was going to prison, right? I got what I signed up for and I thought I had made it, but like there was no end game. There was nothing, there was no end game, bro. That was it. And for a while, like that, that's unsustainable. For a while, like that was, yeah, when I was a kid or whatever, just getting through that, that will take up enough of your time. That's exhausting in itself to be consumed with all of that stuff, everything that's going on. It's clearly stimulating and like, you can kind of run with it and base your character ultimately on that. And being so, as a kid, you kind of like you can be wild and it can be fun and interesting and exciting. And then that shit gets old real quick.
Let me ask. So when you 21 years old on your way to prison, was that your first arrest?
That wasn't my first arrest. So this was my story. So I went down the corner and once I saw when the Oxycontin came around, it was so lucrative that I had a guy and he was the guy he supplied and it was supply and demand and when he couldn't keep up, right? That's when we started the pharmacies, right? And that's like I say, a big thing with me, I say like that's not a flex, that's a fact, you know what I'm saying? It's we started the pharmacies and on some like drugstore cowboy stuff, right? I never did a robbery when I was under the influence, right? I never did a robbery to get drugs, right? So you talk about the lie that I told myself that like was passed down from generation to generation. Why would I label myself anything other than a stick up kid, right? I'm forming my identity. This is who I am, right?
Right.
And why would I label myself anything other than a stick up kid? Because like I was making my bones, I was earning my stripes, like I was checking off the boxes, as I say. And yeah, the whole thing with that, like, it went from getting arrested for OxyContin twice, possession with intent, having a public defender or the neighborhood lawyer, tell you, oh, tell the courts, and you think that you're getting away, tell the courts, oh, you have a problem, So this way, maybe they send you to Gosnell, maybe they, and keep you out of jail. That's the goal, right? To stay out of jail
No.
until you can't. And then the law steps in. And that was a game changer for me because like I wasn't stopping, I was on a mission, a dead end mission, and the law stepped in and it was almost like 3 strikes you're out. So it went from like teenage shit like possession with intent, and that those 2 times where it was like, maybe a few hundred of OxyContin or something like that. Because the OxyContin at that point, it was the late '90s, and I went away in 2000. I was the first one to go away for the OxyContin. Again, not a flex, a fact where it was still a fad. It hadn't yet become an epidemic. It was almost everyone had fun with it, as crazy as that sounds,
No.
especially in today. And I talked about how kids like nowadays, the difference between like 25 years ago was, you think about, we drank, we, had a beer, we smoked a joint, we did a line, we popped a pill. Like people weren't dying, right? They would maybe be hung over the next day or something like that. But you chalk it up like, you live hard, you play hard, and as long as you show up for work and like and take care, provide for your family and all those things. But like I said, yeah, so it was the 2 arrests for the OxyContin, and then shortly after that 21. So like you see where 15, 16, and like I say like my childhood at the end of the day was like a 5-year run, right? Of that, like that was like this is who Joe is, right? All right, so, and now I come home at 30 years old because, like I say, like I'm 21 years old, I blink, and all of a sudden I'm 30 years old, and I come home and I go see my mother in the neighborhood, and I'm feeling good because I'm riding that wave, that high, that euphoria of like coming home and like making it through. But meanwhile, like I have no life skills, I have no tools, right? Because I certainly didn't grow up in prison, right? I just survived. Like I've already, like that's what I mean about our neighborhoods and like where we come from. Right, we were taught that, right? Like God bless, like thank God for our families. We were taught how to survive, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you're not going to suffer in the process.
Yeah.
And when I came home, like I was the one thing, I was a little older, and I had OGs, I had like old heads that really took me under their wing, and I consider them family to this day because they taught me, they taught me how to be a man. They taught me how to carry myself, and they never glorified anything. They never told me like they told me like, listen, this shit's for the birds, like,
Right.
and they humbled me when I needed to be humbled. They never let me think that I was anything that I wasn't, right? But they also were there when I needed them, so they gave me that tough love that I had at home, right? And they also nurtured me too, right? Because it was a balance of both. And like I said, I came home and I was 30 years old, and what I realized is like, I remember saying to myself one day, like, if I have to go down the corner, right? And I wasn't that 21-year-old kid anymore. So I had grown in that way. I maybe like it was just by default with, maturing. I had walked enough laps around that track, in the feds with these guys. And I took everything in and I realized like, listen, if I have to go down the corner and have some jerk off tell me that I'm a solid dude, right? I'm the jerk off. Right? I knew that shit like it made me cringe. It was cringeworthy when I thought about it. So I wasn't that scared kid anymore. I had grown in that way, but now it was a whole other level of now life's here because I can survive in that environment. I can get real comfortable in that environment. And that's the crazy part. Like I say, we're not afraid to die. We're afraid to live, right? So how do I live, man?
Right.
You've armed me with all this with how to not, how to survive and how to like be strong and all this stuff, but how do I live? I have no idea,
Walk me through the Boston jail process because I've heard of Nashua Street, I've heard of South Bay. When you first got locked up, where did they take you and what was that experience like?
Fortunately for myself, and maybe I wouldn't say this back then in hindsight, but I look back and down that street corner, right? Like this, I wasn't going to school to study law. I wasn't doing my homework on that stuff. And I'm certainly not a jailhouse lawyer. So from the corner, what I got was if you get caught with a pistol, right? You get caught with a gun, you'll do a year and a day in South Bay. So that was when I think of that, like as far as like what I was privy to, that was something I was willing to like accept, like, oh, a year and a day, you know?
Yeah.
Like without even subconsciously, I just, and
Yeah, that's
what I
nothing.
found out, right, was that, well, here's the thing, Joe, right? When you're out and you're doing, and you're committing robberies, right? And you're being a cowboy and you're riding this wave and you're the man and you're driving new Lexuses and a new truck, you know, new cars and everyone needs you, right? And you feel like that sense of purpose, you know, that when you cross state lines and you have like, you know, 5,000 plus Oxycontin from like a robbery from a week ago, and you have a trash bag full of stuff that nowadays you'd probably make a mint that you're throwing away because all you went for was that and that alone, and you were going to flip it, and you did all that, right? But you fucked up, you slipped up, and you know you had that shit still in the truck because you weren't on point, right? You weren't what you told yourself, what you told yourself you were, right? What everyone else had no choice but to believe because that's exactly who I was, right? You know, when I have the older kids that had already established themselves or had already made a name for themselves, and they're telling me that like, wow, you know, I heard you doing big things. Like, man, you talk about, you know, my chest puffs out a little, you know, who I was untouchable, right? But that wasn't the truth. That was what I need. And at that point, when it stopped being about what I had already proven myself, you know, in terms of that, for what it's worth, it's like, okay, well, I'm valid now, right? But I had to believe the lie. That's when I had to stop believing the lie, and that was a problem, and that held me. It put me in you know, bad positions for a long time. But luckily for me, I didn't go through. I didn't have to go to the county jails, which, and you know, I know, you know, they're. It's funny because you talk about like that ego where it's like I went to federal prison, right?
Yeah.
So I always say there's like different clientele. You know, I'm in there with Osama. I'm in there with like people like Osama bin Laden, the Timothy McVeigh. Like I'm in there with big hitters, right? Like
You skipped the baby steps and went right to the fucking
right.
Yeah.
And I laugh about that shit now because for so long that character that like that I created this character. It wasn't who I was. I wasn't taught to be this. I wasn't. My parents didn't raise me to be this, right? But as far as like when you start labeling like who you are, like based on a portrayal of like your neighborhood or a reputation, that's a problem. You know,
Well, you were expected to be tough. You're from a tough place. Everyone around you is living the same way. It's expected, and if you're gonna be viewed as solid, you're gonna follow suit. And like you said, you followed suit and you exceeded expectations.
yeah.
So when you what were the charges that before we break down the feeling of being in federal prison, what were the charges you were indicted on that landed you in federal prison?
The charges that landed me in federal prison were crossing state lines, so interstate drug trafficking. 924C means that use and carry a firearm during and in relation to a drug trafficking crime. When Joe Lawler, when from Charlestown, right, when he has something that people need, and I get a call from my buddy that's on a scholarship in Maine, you know, playing college D1 college hockey, ready to go to like play professional hockey, and they call me up and ask me like, you know, you hold, and I said always, and I decided to make that trip to Maine. All of a sudden, right, like Joe's crossing state lines, and Joe and the feds stepped in, and the feds had been investigating me prior to this. Like I say, the feds always get what they seek. If the feds step in, you got problems because the reason that the conviction rate is so high is because they only pick up things that are a slam dunk, and the only way that anyone's going to fight them is if you catch a life bid and you have nothing to lose, right? And you'll take your chances. Because when I plead out the low end of my guidelines, I plead out to 111 months, which is 9 years, 3 months. And I sit in that courtroom, my family's there, and I'm in New Hampshire. And I'm thinking to myself, pacing, after I know that I'd already signed this plea, right, with my lawyer, and all he's doing is advocating and talking. And I'm thinking, I'm still not accepting the fact, like, no, this is real. And I'm thinking, well, you're not that bad. Like, the judge will see you. He'll be like, he'll see, like, he'll take some pity on you, have some mercy.
No.
I was until the very end. I was like, no, I can't.
You're thinking like this.
I'm gonna walk upstairs. I'm in the tank. I'm in the cages, and I'm pacing, and it couldn't be more of not the truth. I went up there and like that judge. I don't even think he looked up.
Yeah, he didn't give a fuck.
No, and from that point, I was. I stopped being a human being. I became a number and I became a statistic. And, 02669-02669-748. I'll never forget that number. That was my federal prison number. In the feds, the last three numbers are where the state that you're from. So 038 is Boston. So it gets even better. When I get to the feds and, my buddies from the neighborhood, my homeboys, they see I have a 748 number, right? And they're like, why you got 748, right? Oh, you didn't hear? Well, I don't know, bro. You tell me. Bro, that's organized crime, right? So now I'm with this dude, that dude, from the Gambino family, from the guys from New York or whatever. I'm with these guys, right? And I got a 748 number, right?
Yeah. Like because of the tag, they can identify
absolutely
the crime.
Yes.
That's crazy. So in Florida, how it is like my DC number is C07652.
You'll never forget that.
The C is for Central Florida.
Okay.
Most people from Tampa will get a T. I got fucked. They gave me a C. So I used to say the C's for Cherry, my last name.
Yeah.
And if you're from Orlando, you get an X. And, they got the shit different everywhere. But it doesn't relate to any crime or anything like that.
Yeah.
It just tells the area. So you go in there, and they're thinking you're on some mob shit. And you're actually around these guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you talked about, I had no idea. Like I said, I had to learn. They taught me. And thank God I had the right people around me. But I'd be lying if I didn't sit there and tell you that as a kid, 21 years old, like, I wasn't debating it. I wasn't questioning it. If, that's 748, like that's spoke for itself.
Right.
Now
let me ask you though, like you said, you skipped the juvie, the county, went straight to the fucking feds. And when you land in the feds and you got organized crime on your tag and you realize the guys that you're around, you must have felt like, yeah, I'm here. I did it. I'm right where, you didn't want to be in prison.
Right.
But I'm around the gangsters.
Yeah.
And that means looking at you fucking made it.
Absolutely.
What was the feeling at 21 sitting in there being like, fuck, this is it. I'm around the big dogs right now.
Well, the thing was when I'm around like, Johnny Caneglia from, he was one of John Gotti's guys and, the Castellano hit and, Lorenzo Menino and he's, the acting boss of the Gambinos now, allegedly, and these guys are the best guys, right? And men, right? Like carry themselves like gentlemen. That's what they taught me. I learned from them. But they were like their personas and like what they were bigger than life. And I'm a kid and I'm like, I knew I wasn't, I wasn't them, right? Nor did I, but hey, if you want to throw me in the mix, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
hey, you know what I mean? I'll learn. Yeah, I'll give it some time, whatever. We'll go by like a seniority list, and maybe I'll get there at some point. But like, I'll take my crumbs or whatever.
Yeah, like
I
wasn't doing mob hits, but I'll sit at the table if you let me.
Yeah,
Fuck
exactly.
it.
Yeah. I'll knock when I'm done eating and shit. And being around those guys, it definitely did. Like I say about the ego, like that's the whole thing for so long, the misinformation and like the labeling of everything I did for all the wrong reasons. It had nothing to do with like, wasn't the moral thing and stuff. I mean, to me, I'll tell myself like I was Robin Hood. I steal from the rich and give to the poor. Like I don't rob people. You know what I mean? I rob institutions, right?
Man.
They have insurance. Like they're insured by that. You know,
it's all paid. It's covered.
Yeah, and and I'm not like, So I go in a bank, all right, and I'm a kid or whatever, and I point the gun at someone, and I'm apologizing to the lady because I see that she's fearful, right? So I'm thinking like, I want to take. I want like if I don't have, I'm gonna take, and like I'm gonna get mine and all this shit, right? but I don't want to do it like, but I also want to be, I don't want to do it on some like grimy shit. You know
have
what
like
I'm
a
saying?
hot-
Like,
yeah.
it's like honorable, right? Like,
Right.
you know, so
An
they-
honorable criminal.
So what do they say? Like honor amongst thieves,
Yeah.
right? That was my, that's who I wanted to be, right? I want to be an honorable criminal. Well, that's kind of an oxymoron, right?
No.
And I was, for what it was, for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what I was. You know what? And there's guys that to this day, like I said, like, and I feel like I know that you're the same way. We're the type of people that like, and it's about looking at yourself, that be based on our loyalty, based on like, you know, being down for the cause and like what we believe in. We buy into it, and like, and we're gonna fight for it. We're gonna like, we're gonna represent it. We're gonna stand for everything that's worth. And in our case, what that looks like, right, is we might be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person, right? And that person, next thing you know, you're an accessory to murder. And like, yeah, and I always say, we'll curl up before we'll ever roll over, you know, and that's the truth.
Right.
And what that looks like I said, this isn't about like, you know, as I sit here and tell you, that's not a flex, bro. Like that's who I am at my core. But I don't need you to know that. You know what I mean? Like that's when I started knowing and believing, like, all right, well, this is who I am, and like, and that was always good enough, right? As opposed to, you know, in spite of what I had told myself and like maybe what you had told yourself, and it saved yourself a lot of headaches, a lot of bullshit, you know. And that's it. And then you talked about the town, and I know that you had said the movie The Town. We had spoke about that the movie The Town was one of your favorite movies.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this, like, you know, recently, you know, you see a lot of people fraudulence and stuff like that, where at the end of the day, like, there's something to be said about speaking your truth. And like my saying today is like, you know, I am the town. And like, I'll elaborate on that for like my predecessors or like my homeboys or like my friends that have put in work and like that are exactly that, you know what I mean? Because it's not about me. Like that's what I mean by that is like, that's a mindset. That's a mentality, right? People like that people put in work, and there was a lot of suffering that went along with that, right? So like, you know who you are out there, you know what I'm saying? And if you don't, that if you have a problem with that, or like that, what I just said, or if you're insecure about whatever, like, you know, should probably, you know, you should look inside, you know what I'm saying? Because that has nothing to do with anything but yourself, you know, because like that validation and stuff, like I say today, like that was the case. Like I did grow up where it was glorified. Like, you know, if you want to make it, you gotta be a stick up guy, right? And why couldn't I just be a firefighter like my father, right? You know, it was like a Bronx tale, you know, like the working man's a sucker.
Yeah.
You know, so the movies, like, put it this way, like movies are movies for a reason, right? Hollywood's Hollywood. It makes for a good story. It's entertaining. They don't tell you the flip side, right? So when that story is like your reality,
You see the side that the viewers don't see.
you see the side that the viewers don't see, but it's also like us sitting here right now. The one thing that like I try to just stay in my lane, whatever, and focus on yourself. But like nowadays, like sometimes it's unavoidable, and there's nothing worse to me where it's like, you know, be who you are, show me who you are, and let me decide what I want to do with that. Right? This isn't about like telling someone, like, I'm not trying to get you to believe my story. You know what I'm saying? I'm just speaking my truth.
You're just getting it out.
I'm just speaking my truth.
Yeah.
And we had spoke before this in a little bit, chopping it up. I choose to believe that like that manifests, like that's attractive. You know, that to me, that's appealing. That's intriguing. So all these things that before, like you told me, like, or at least I thought that, you know, this is what looked good and this is what felt good. And now I base it on my own experience of it, right?
Right.
And maybe if we didn't go through that stuff, we wouldn't feel the same way.
No,
you know, I'm not
definitely.
going to sit here and glorify that shit. But like at the end of the day, like I said, I wasn't raised to be that. But like, does that mean that I'm not? No, I am that, right? I am the motherfucking town, right? But with that being said, that doesn't, like, you don't get points for that. You know what I mean? Like that that's not to, I don't need that to make myself feel good, you know? And I would say to a kid, any kids growing up and stuff like that, today I would tell them the truth, just like those, the OGs and like the old heads that put me under their wing had taught me, you know? And I would say, like, I'd tell them exactly the truth, right? And let them know, like, you know, there's a big world, you know what I mean? It's too good out here, man, to to put yourself in those predicaments and those situations. But it takes work and stuff like that. Like I said, we struggle. I struggle to, how do I live? You know, I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, that's something I've said before, is especially when it comes to violence and violence in prison. Every scar you put on somebody else mentally scars you. And I can see, you know, because I can relate to a lot of your story. I'm sure there's some things that you can relate to mine. I can see that the things you've been through has affected you in more ways than one, you know? And that's the thing that people don't explain when it's like, yeah, you want to live up to these expectations, this reputation, you want to earn this and that, but you don't understand how fucked you're going to become along the way.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the mix, you're fine. When you're by yourself, that's when you realize the anxiety, the PTSD,
Absolutely.
the things that people don't understand until they're in that experience. And once you have it, you can't just get rid of it. You're stuck with it, and you got to bear that weight.
It's a blessing and a curse. You know?
Is.
We talked about it. Like, what was I running from? Myself. You know what I'm saying? And then when I was forced to, like I said, the law stepped in. Like, everything happens by design. Like, it's not no coincidence. I choose to believe that. Like I say, without hope, like, what's the point?
Right.
You know what you just said there. So the only way that I can make sense of things, and I feel like if someone can get something out of that, just us having a conversation and talking about these things, because I may think it in my head, but to be able to express it or convey it, you know, I had talked about Ian Bick. You know, I went on his podcast before, and he gave me a little platform. And
shout out to Ian.
Yeah, shout out to Ian. And I remember I went on there. The feedback, like the reviews, were like people. And I honestly, bro, I do a podcast with my friend Devin, and you're gonna meet him soon. You guys have been in touch or whatnot, and it's called the Lace Up Podcast. But I'll hit that at the end. And I've never watched an episode, bro. I've never watched one of my own. You know what I mean? I couldn't sit through one of my own, let alone fucking watching someone else's, right?
Yeah.
But I'll pick up little like snippets, and people were like putting a lot of negative shit. Like, I didn't even know, but people were like, oh, bro, like, oh, you know, you're doing good or whatever. Like, I'm like, what the fuck are you even talking about? And it's funny because I thought about it, and I'm like, that shit doesn't faze me. But at the same time, it's almost like, it kind of, I'm a human being, right? So it's kind of like, you know, we were talking about that, like keyboard gangsters, are people like throwing shit out there, and like trolls and stuff like that.
And shit.
It's like, bro, how about this? Like, when I say like I'm the talent, it's like, yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, bro. You know, what's that look like, right? It's not about me fucking sitting here and being able to, you know, I don't give a fuck if I say like too much, if I say, you know, if I stutter, right? It's like, that's called PTSD, right? That's called going through shit or whatever and being a human being, right? So I'm not here to fucking like tell a story to entertain you. I'm not a fucking monkey in a circus, you know what I'm saying?
You know, growing up where you grew up, you're taught in the household not to snitch on your friends. You're taught how to be tough. You're taught how to fight. You're not taught how to respond to trolls on the fucking internet. That was never a thing that was because nobody gives a fuck about that. Because one thing the internet's done is it's given a voice to people that don't speak in the street.
Yes.
That weren't never on a corner, that never came outside. It's given a voice to people that have never lived that fucking life.
100%.
And they're trying to judge people that actually have. But speaking on validation.
I do want to say one last thing. When I've heard you on the way down here to Tampa to come to link up, Devin had put on some of your previous podcasts. And the one thing, like, I was sitting there and I was closing my eyes or whatever. And he's driving and I was listening. And one of the things that I said to him, I said, that's not taught, right? You can't, that's learned. So when I heard you speak, the one thing I can tell you is that, and I'd put, you know, I don't gamble anymore because, you know, I run into problems, but I'd put my life on the line, like when it comes to like my judgment, you know, like judge of character.
Right.
And I think that's one thing that we learned in the situation we've been through. When I heard you speak, whatever, and Devin had said, like, you know, no one let me in anywhere. Like, I kicked the fucking door in, you know?
Yeah.
And when I hear someone speak like that, you're humble, but you're also like, whether it's for, maybe that is part of like the trolls and stuff like that, where it's like, you don't get to fucking tell my story. You don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I tell my story.
Yeah, when people ask, oh, how did Jake become a factor in hip hop? Who let him in? No one let me in. I kicked the fucking door and now I'm here.
Yeah,
that's how you fucking do it. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. No, for real. You can't say that unless, put it this way, you can say whatever you want, right? But it's not going to be received or like, you know, you can't
it's
actually
not gonna be
mean it
unless people know that's
100%.
actually what the fuck happened.
Yeah, real recognizes real, man.
For sure. When speaking on validation, trying to validate yourself, That's a big component within the federal prison system from what I've heard. I've only done state time.
Yep.
But from what I've heard is the second you go in there, you have to validate yourself. And it's not just, all right, you did some street shit. We want to see your paperwork, and this is gonna
100%.
This is gonna decide who the fuck you get to be around. Now, hearing that you were already around gangsters and, you know, mob hits and shit like that, guys, it was official guys, I'm sure you checked out. But what was the experience like for you having to be told, look, we need to see your shit, and we're gonna decide where you go?
Absolutely. You talk about an experience. Like, I joke around. I say, like, I'm 21 years old. I'm going from MDC Brooklyn to fly Con Air, and then I'm hitting Pennsylvania. I'm hitting this like world that I had never experienced, right? And like, it's something that you'd have to go through yourself. And I hit the buses. I'm on the bus, and there's like I joke, but it was the truth. I grew up in a neighborhood like white Irish Catholic. Okay, in Boston it was like very segregated, right? So the neighborhood's like whites. You had a white area. It was so segregated. It was so segregated where you'd have white neighborhood that was Irish. Then you have across the bridge is the Little Italy, you know.
Yeah,
so it wasn't just white. It was like by, you know, nationality and stuff like that. And when I went on that bus after flying Con Air, the one thing that my neighborhood taught me and growing up in like the inner city was I had never been around other cultures. I had never been around, you know, black people, Spanish people and stuff like that. But when I was on that bus, I may have like fear of unknown of like what to expect, but there was no fear of like, oh, this dude's like a different color than me or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Like that's one thing that was like bred in like being from the inner city. And, you know, on the bus, it was like, I think there was me. I joke around like I was the white boy. You had a Canadian, which is like, I guess they're half, you know, white boy. And then you had like a dude from like Brockton or whatever, right? And like where I'm from, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, does he, you know, is he white, black? I don't know what he, you know what I mean? If he don't know what he is, like, you know what I'm saying? And it's funny because growing up, like as a kid, like I looked around and I'm like, it had nothing to do with the bus and like the culture and the people I was around and like what color they were. It was when I hit Lewisburg and I'm at a holdover, and I joke like I'm like Andy Dufresne, like in Shawshank Redemption. I'm looking around and it's so overwhelming because it's like a castle. And it's like, dude, where the fuck am I?
Yeah.
And then you know, but at the same time, being from that neighborhood and the perks that it would have, and also like I talk about like the false sense of pride, it served its purpose a lot of the time. Where when I hit that compound, right, they had already knew I was coming, right, because word travels, and like. And they had already had my care package set up, right? And they already told me, like, they gave me the ins and outs, right? Like, I just followed suit, you know?
So they already had shit for you? Like, when
they
you
had
got
everything
there?
everything ready for me.
What were you told? Like, were you told, like, yeah, you got to stick with the whites, and then these are the specific whites you're going to be with?
Yeah, no, no one told me nothing. The Boston car, you know, the guys that, if in the language, like the jail language or the prison language or whatnot, you know, not necessarily that we call it that, but like, yeah, they called it, they were the shot callers. They held the keys to the yard or whatnot. I say it all the time about Boston for what it's worth. It may not mean much in everyday life, but if you're in that environment, Boston has the best reputation. You know,
I've heard Boston's
and that has nothing to do with
respected.
me. That has to do with like I was just one of many, but like that came from years and years, like the people that put in work before. So, you know, just to keep that it's a good feeling, you know. So there was no one telling me anything except the people that needed to, and why wouldn't I fall right in line, you know? Because you know, it wasn't. I trusted them right off the rip, even though I knew, you know, I trusted them right off. I still held on to that, and like they didn't. At the end of the day, I guess they didn't prove me wrong. Like it confirmed good things. You know what I mean? So. They took me out of the wing, and you know, I gave them. They said, "Yeah, this is what you got to do. You got to, you know, grab your paperwork, whatever." And they presented it. You know, they did what they had to do. All right, here,
Confirmed everything, and everything was good.
100%.
Now, you're with the Boston car and the feds. They have a fucking outstanding reputation in the feds, so you know you're around some solid guys. Was your car getting into any conflicts with other cars, or were you witnessing any violence going on in the places that you were at?
So the difference between I don't know, you might have heard the saying before. They say like there's a saying that says like the state is like a a physical incarceration as opposed to like the feds being a mental incarceration.
Mm.
And there's some truth in that, but at the same time, like there's different levels. There's penitentiary, right? There's highs, there's mediums, there's lows, and then there's like camps that either for rats or like dudes that like white collar criminals and shit like that. You know, we don't make it there. We don't go to camps. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're like a kid and like your points are real low. You know, and you have a skid bid. You know, but chances are like no, you're going into the you're not gonna be in a camp. You're not gonna have a chance to like maybe like leave or whatever, right? You're gonna be in a prison environment, in a prison setting, and you're gonna do time, and you're gonna have to get into a routine. When I went there, like I said, the clientele was different. When shit popped off, it popped off, but it wasn't an everyday stress like that. It was almost like there wasn't that heaviness that I noticed with family, friends, acquaintances that I grew up with that did state time. I think I would be, I know for a fact 100% that I would be a different person, and that it would have shaped me differently if I had done state time as opposed to the Fed time. You know, the way people carried themselves. They, like I said, it wasn't about, so as far as proving and like letting people know, like, yeah, they had their story of who they were or whatever, but not necessarily had to put in work when they got there. It was like their reputation, like it stood for itself, you know?
Right.
And if need be, like shit happened, you know what I mean? And like they weren't no crash dummies. Like they were, the guys that were established, like were official from the jump. Like they came off the street official, you know?
So they didn't have to prove anything, just everyone knew.
No. There was plenty of guys willing to
to fucking do it to you.
Absolutely.
21 years old with 9 years in the feds. What was your first time seeing an act of violence in the feds?
In the feds, like stabbings and stuff like that, you know.
You were seeing that shit.
Yeah, but not as much as like I said, there would be more in New Hampshire County Jail, right? Like there would be more frequent, but that would be dudes like cutting up or something. Like there'd be more stuff like that, seeing like either violence or, beefing, as opposed to like in the feds. Like I say, it's hard to explain, but the guys that were there was a lot of unspoken stuff. There was a lot of things that, unwritten rules or whatnot, but basically it was kind of like you got in, like you fell in line, but there was an air about it, as opposed to like no one was unsure of themselves there, in that aspect. Everyone was pretty much like, you got a compound in the Fed, you got a whole compound of guys, like hundreds of guys that think they're the man, right? They know, right? They have to be, right? Like that's gonna get them through their time. That's probably how they survived on the street, right? And you talk about all that, like those egos, like all together. So now there's just a hierarchy, right? And if something's gonna go on or whatever, then it's gonna be for something like worth it. You know what I mean? It's gonna, if dudes are getting shipped out, or like, because it's not even about like, oh, we're not gonna fight and like, we're gonna go the whole, and like maybe the loser gets shipped out or something like that shit. Not in that situation. Like, no, they're coming for your head. You know what I mean? Not that they don't do that other places, but it was almost like there was gonna be an end to it. It wasn't gonna carry on. They were looking for, how do we, they were looking to end it right there. Like that was they were looking to put an exclamation point on that shit. So.
And was there a time when you witnessed somebody get taken out in the feds?
Not like killed or whatever, but definitely stabbings and shit like that, and fights or whatnot. People, and the whole thing with the feds, where is something to be said about it. People aren't dummies, right? Like we might get there, like guys might get there and be on some different shit or whatever, but when they get there, like when like there's certain perks or whatever, it could be not being locked down, 23 hours a day. Right? Yeah. People act accordingly.
Yeah, they don't want to fuck that up.
People act accordingly, and not only do they act accordingly, but they want to. Part of that is like being hyper vigilant and making sure that you act accordingly.
Right.
So that was easy. Like that kind of just came with it, and I just followed suit. And thank God, like I said, coming from Boston or whatever, and I know that's not everyone's experience. Where if you don't have the right people leading you, I don't care if you're fucking on the street, if you're in prison, like in life in general, right? Because out of sight, out of mind. But people that are like they're still alive, bro. You know what I mean? Like they're still You might not see them and stuff like that, but they're feeling what they're feeling. They're going through their day. They're just trying to get through a day like anyone else, you know?
After doing 9 years, you come home. What is that like?
Unprepared. I hate when I hear guys say like I grew up in prison. I grew up in like who the fuck are you? Like stop playing, will you? That shit to me is like it's foolish, right? Because it sounds so silly. There's no growth there. There was no growth from the time I went down the corner and like and ran with an ideology, ran with like this reputation that was created by like fiction. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it created a lot of, that's the whole thing with Hollywood and like entertainment and like, yeah, people love seeing shit about that's all intriguing, appealing. Not for me, bro. Not for the fucking families. There's plenty of people that aren't on here that are doing life in prison, right? Good people too, right? Not everyone in prison is a shitbag that would certainly, you know, give that time back, all that time back and all that, those accolades or like I said, then have you, you know, think like, they're people, you know, they go through things. They have families, right? That suffer and that go through it with them. I think our families, you know, the people out here, bro, it's harder out here than it is in there. In my experience, that's what I've said. You know, prison is it's not an ideal place. It's not the place you'd want to be. And does bad shit happen? Yeah, right. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. That's for sure. That's why people, you know, I'm big on like prison reform. I do want to, real quick, is that I remember being in the feds and I hate the politics, right? And that's one thing you talk about, like there is politics and like it serves its purpose. But I remember like getting to the low and I was getting short on time. And the hardest part of my sentence, those 111 months, was the beginning, right? And like going Con Air and like diesel treatment, like because they'll bounce you around and shit like that, especially if you're a problem, right? So right away they're kind of forming you and shaping you and molding you. Like, listen, you're gonna do what we tell you, right?
Right.
And then when you're getting short and like there's a different type of anxiety, right? Because once you get in your routine, that's doable, right? Like I say, anyone can do time, bro, right? It's about how you're gonna come out, right? Like, you know, people think it's like I don't give a fuck, right? Like, and in my neighborhood, like it was like people would wear that as a badge of honor, right? And thank God, like I was sharp enough where my parents, like they raised me properly where like I knew right when I was old enough and like mature enough to get that. Like I was like, I called it exactly what it was, you know, called it right out. But coming home, it was a shock. I had no life skills. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for it. And I rode that wave and it was unsustainable. And it all came back like these little short bursts of like purpose, right? And coming home and starting a family and raising kids and being like, again, the whole labeling thing, right? It's all feel good. What can make Joe feel good? Well, as a kid, right? It made me feel good for you to think that like something about me that like meant something on the street, right? And now it feels good because like I'm raising two kids and you know I got a wife at home and I'm being the family guy, but I have no clue how to be a family guy. I have no clue how to provide. I didn't look up to my dad, who was a firefighter who fought in Vietnam and was a great guy because it wasn't enough for me to just be a good guy, right? I needed more, more than that, and therefore I looked at things that weren't that, you know, that basically led me to where I went, and you know, if I could take any of it back, like I said, you know, the same person that like I didn't look up to was the same person, and I always say we get the good and the bad from our parents. People love to hang on to the bad stuff because it hurts more, right? And the thing with that being said, like, you know, we get the good and the bad with it or whatever, but you know, I think that I always say I'd like to think that like love trumps all or whatever, that unconditional love. But in the process, it comes with, you know, you're going to go through your learning stuff, you know, just like you have. And out here, what I try to do on a daily basis is just, you know, put my best foot forward. And the thing with today is like, if I know that I tried my best that day, when it stopped being about, you know, trying to set the stage and like play a character and like, so this is what Joe's life looks like. when I can put my head in the pillow and know I tried my best that day, because some days, a lot of the time, my best is, it doesn't meet expectations. It's not up to standard, but now I've raised the level of, what I do expect, but at the same time, try to give myself a little grace, and because I know that I've heard you speak, we're super critical, super hard on ourselves, and I say, like, bro, I don't need someone on the internet. I don't need anyone to beat me up, bro. You can't hurt me more than fucking I can hurt myself,
Right.
And there's a saying about, like, you can't kill the willing, bro, like, what are you gonna do? Beat me up, bro? Like, fuck, I don't even like myself half the time. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, so that, and we were talking about earlier, being down here and being in different environments. The one thing that I can say was worth it, and I can take pride in today, like a healthy pride, is the fact, like Joey Molino says, that, like, we can go anywhere, right? We can go anywhere. That's a good fucking feeling, bro. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I can walk, and the even to add to that, my parents, those citizen people that are knock around people, my father can go down the street and play Keno, and no, the kids in the corner aren't gonna fuck with them. My mother can. There's something to be said about that. Like, she's proud of me, and in a way where it's like, Charlestown's a crazy place, but it's almost like, dude, your parents should take pride that, like, yeah, because nowadays, unfortunately, I don't know when it ever became a thing or whatever, but like people recanting or telling, that was never a thing, bro, right? You're not supposed to get, like, they're not going to throw a parade. You don't get points for not telling. You were never supposed to.
Yeah.
And now you hear dudes, like, it's almost like, all right, well, it's crazy, but like, for your family to be able to keep their head up, to be able to be proud of that, right? I don't know when it changed, but like, it has to count for something, because what's out there is a lot of fucking bullshit and a lot of fucking false, fraudulence and whatnot, So it's like, how do we fight back? Like, the best thing I can do, we can sit here and have a real conversation, right? We can speak the fucking truth and challenge that, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And like,
Just be real.
right? Because I say, like, where there's smoke, there's fire, and they say, nowadays, obviously it's different. Like, yeah, could someone throw a jacket on you or something like that? Yeah, of course it happens, right? But chances are, dude, you know what? No one can say nothing bad about me, because fucking I never fucking did anyone dirty. So you know what I mean? So, and you get in where you fit in. Like, that's the thing. So I know that's a big thing with you, where people come, and if I think there's two different people, right? Like, and that shit never lies, where that shit, like, I try to speak out against that. Like, and I feel like you're like a freedom fighter, where it's like, bro, you don't get to speak, like, just live your life, stay in your lane and whatnot. But when I hear someone, like, being questioned or judged or whatever and stuff like that, and it's like, who the fuck are you, bro? You know what I'm saying? Like, who knows you? That's the saying we'd say. Like,
Well,
who knows you, bro?
I think the thing for me is I send a lot of shots.
Yeah.
And when you're sending shots, eventually
Shots fired.
they're going to come back your way too.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. Like, I'm out here exposing people's favorite fucking rappers.
Yeah.
They're going to try to say anything about me to fucking alleviate the situation I just caused.
Yeah.
But it is what the fuck it is. And just as far as perspective goes, sometimes I got to remind myself, I got over 1 million subscribers. 1 million people
That's
that fuck
amazing.
with me. 1 million people rock with me, right?
Absolutely.
There's going to be at least 1,000 people that fucking hate me.
Yeah.
But that 1,000 doesn't matter when there's 1 million that fucking love me.
Of course.
And that's the thing that I try to think of. But let me ask you, right? Now you got the podcast.
Yep.
And I'm sure you don't give a fuck about the trolls.
Yeah. I don't know.
What for you is the purpose? What is the message you're trying to push out? And how does it help you?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So the Lace Up podcast, you can find that on YouTube or whatnot. Like, this shit's all new to us, right? The message that we're trying to convey, right? So lace up is like a term you'd hear in, like, prison, right? Like, we don't walk around with shower shoes on, bro, right? Right away, that's a red flag, right? You don't wear shower shoes, right? You're always ready, right? And, like, it's saying, like, lace up, like, you better be ready. You have to be ready. You got to be on point. You got to move militant. And how that carries over to the street, right? And it's a cool, catchy saying to me, because what it says to me is, like, I want people. Everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a story. Tell your fucking story, bro, right? I can't help it, if you know what I mean. I earn the fucking, if for what it's worth, bro. And I'll tell you, it's not worth much, right? But you don't, like, and the same for you. And that's why I say, like, I get passionate about it, because you don't get to tell my fucking story, right? I know what I've been through, right? And if someone's going to speak it, it's going to be me, right? Because it's my story and it's the truth, right?
Right.
And I'm okay with that. And the thing is, we want to convey the message that, like, how do you get through adversity? Everyone goes through adversity, right? How do you bounce back? How do you, because to me, like, that right there that's the hope we talk about. That's what, having faith and seeing people, what attracts me and like what's intriguing to me and why, it's an honor to be able to sit here with you, and I feel blessed and I'm grateful, and I can say that to you and look you in the eye, right? And tell you that to have an opportunity like this, right? That counted for something. All that shit, that misinformation, all that stuff, all that suffering, bro, it fucking counted for something.
Right.
Right? So, like, that's a good feeling, man, right?
No, that's an amazing way to think. Because, I mean, even putting my own life in perspective, prison, as much as it fucking sucked, it was everything I needed at the time. Because my father wasn't there to teach me things that I ended up learning in there. But just being amongst men. Seeing how people move, seeing what respect is, and seeing how crossing the fucking line can leave you dead.
Absolutely.
And with where I'm at now and what I've turned my worst life experience into, it's become my greatest blessing.
Absolutely.
And that's why I was very excited for y'all to come down here, because I love seeing people following that same path.
Yep.
Taking the thing that traumatized them the most and turning it into something in which not only do we share our stories with other people that can relate and it'll help them get through it, but we can also be an example of pushing through it and finding success on the other side.
Of course. It goes back to what I said about that purpose. I always search for that. I ran for myself, right? So there was I didn't even have a chance I wasn't looking for no purpose, bro. I don't want no responsibilities. I want to be the man, right? But I don't want to fucking be, I want you to see me, but I don't want all the attention. You know what I mean? Like, right. You can't be both, bro, right? So pick something, right? You can't be a gangster and be, like, pick one, bro. And the thing is, when I use that word, like I say now, and I feel like I know that you get it, but it's like, bro, at the end of the day, like, people that are trolls and shit like that, like, I got this to say, right? Because, and I get passionate about it, where, like, gangster, bro, right? Like, you know what? Like, I've learned, like, what a real gangster is, like, showing up for their family, providing, right? Learning from their mistakes and helping someone out, right? How can you turn your fucking pain into a purpose? How can you turn your pain into purpose and help another person, right? Because what that shows me is, like, that your core is who you were. You were that. Have you learned things along the way? Like, and you needed to figure that out. Like, that's what I mean about I wouldn't change it if I could. So if you're going through something, like, you may not understand it, but, like, hang the fuck on, bro. Hang on, because there's two different people. And if we're going to do this, like, we're going to do it right. And if we're going to make money, it's like, and if you're going to make money and be a fucking fraud, bro, let us get that, right?
Yeah.
No, hold up. You don't, no, let us get that bag. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? So I look at it that way, and, to be able to, I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. I've needed, like, to see you, and, like, but if we don't open our mouths, like, a closed mouth don't get fed. So people need to open their mouth and talk, right? It may not be always eloquent and always come off, but if you speak the truth, like I say, you can't fuck up the truth, man. And what I've learned is that when I've spoken my truth, I've got blessings in my life, and, like, the right people have attracted to me, and I've manifested those types of things, and just being okay with that. And, to see the humility, I feel like I love being around people, and it inspires me, it motivates me, right? I don't want what you have, bro, right? I just want to be okay with me. I never at my worst day did I ever want to be anyone but me, right? But I had to figure out how to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Be the best version of yourself.
Absolutely. And I see the same in you,
I love that, bro, and I appreciate you coming on. Definitely shout out your podcast one more time.
Yeah, Lace Up Podcast, like and subscribe. And, I'm kind of new to the whole YouTube thing or whatnot, but, I'm gonna try to peel my ears, listen, learn and whatnot, and, keep moving together. I can't do it alone. I don't want to, nor do I have to. And, it's a blessing to be able to do things with you. It says everything about your character, as far as I'm concerned. And, to have this opportunity, I'm just grateful. And, like I said, where I'm from, like, if we like it, we love it, you know what I'm saying? And
definitely,
so there's, all love, brother. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, the feeling is mutual, bro. And I'm looking forward to coming on your podcast.
100%, man. That'd be great. Thank you, Jake.